At 19, I left with 3 bags and hidden funds. Years later, my father called for $18,500. I blocked his number and let him panic. I left home at 19 with 3 bags and a secret bank account, convinced I was cursed. Years later, when my father called demanding $18,500, I blocked his number and let him panic. It was time for their luck to run out. Growing up, my parents had my older brother first. He was their golden child, great, kind, good grades, athletic. For years later, I came along, and they often joked that their luck just ran out. My dad lost his job 7 months after I was born. My mom had a car accident when I was 3. My grandmother died when I was 5. Our family dog escaped when I was 6. And for every single one of those things, I was blamed, like I was some kind of walking, talking storm cloud. My mother initially called me her little storm cloud playfully, but soon it wasn't a joke anymore. By age 11, my parents were publicly blaming me for everything. High electricity bill? It was my fault for overusing it. Dad didn't get promoted? Must have been the negative energy from raising me. My brother quickly caught on, dubbing me Jinx. Through middle and high school, I internalized it. I genuinely believed I was cursed. I apologized for things that weren't my fault, tried to blend in, to become invisible, anything to avoid spreading my bad luck. I worked so hard to prove I wasn't a burden, got good grades, and by 17 I was working to buy my own clothes and school supplies, just so they couldn't claim I was wasting their money. But nothing I did ever changed their minds. When my brother got into a good college at 18, they threw him a huge party, inviting all their friends, bragging about how he'd succeed and make them proud. 2 years later, I got into the same school with an even higher scholarship. My mother predicted it wouldn't last because I always lost things. My father, ever the optimist, advised me to attend community college to avoid the shame when I inevitably failed. But I went anyway. I packed those 3 bags, gathered my secret savings, and left home at 19. My parents didn't help me move. My brother didn't even say goodbye, convinced I'd be back. My mother just told me to call, which I never did. College was hard, not because of luck, but because it was genuinely challenging. And it was even harder to unlearn every toxic thing my parents had taught me about myself. But I found my first real friends, people who didn't blame me for every minor inconvenience. I joined clubs, studied subjects that mattered to me. My roommate once told me it was okay to fail an exam, that we'd just study more next time. She didn't blame me for the damage. She simply wanted to improve things. I graduated with honors. An architecture firm 5 hours from home hired me, and within 6 years I was a project manager, moving steadily upward. I bought a small condo with my own money. I adopted a non-fleeing cat, and my partner, Lucas, actually enjoyed being with me. Everything my parents predicted would fall apart stayed perfectly intact, built without their words, without their help. Meanwhile, back home, their lives deteriorated. My father lost another job, this time due to drinking. My mother's health declined because she refused to see doctors until it became an emergency. And my brother? He quit college after 3 years and moved back home. Failing to find work, he spent his days playing video games in his childhood room. Their golden kid turned out to be fool's gold. But still, nobody connected the dots. They were too busy waiting for my failure. My mother called me twice a year on my birthday to check in, but it always felt like she was expecting me to struggle. When I got promoted, she told me not to get too comfortable, because good things don't last for me. When I proudly told her I bought a condo, her first question was about my debt. She actually laughed when I said I was glad and quipped, "Give it time." So, I stopped telling her anything. I just stopped calling back. Then, for years ago, my parents couldn't afford my brother Ethan's surgery. That's when my father called. His first call in years. He didn't ask how I was. He just said they needed money, that I should share since I seemed to have so much. I stared at my phone for 25 minutes after hanging up. My hands were shaking. My mind replayed the number. $18,500. This call, after 4 years of silence, was only for money. Only for the expectation that I would pay. This crushing constriction in my chest, that awful feeling of being blamed for my very existence, it was back. I placed the phone on the coffee table, half expecting it to ring again with a worse message. The sunset darkened my living room, but I didn't turn on the lights. My cat joined me on the couch, and I instinctively stroked her silky fur, trying to focus on anything but my raging thoughts. Lucas came home at 6:45 p.m. I was still holding my phone, probably picked it up again without realizing. As he dropped his suitcase, his face changed, adjusting to the dim room, then to my expression. I told him about the call, my words sounding robotic, like a shopping list, not a raw explanation of how my father, who treated me like a curse, was now demanding money. Lucas sat beside me, his jaw tight, trying to hide his anger. He asked what my father said, and I quoted him word for word. His expression shifted from worry to a fierce protectiveness, and for once, I didn't feel weird for being sad. When he asked how I was, I hesitated. I wanted to yell. I felt terrible for being furious. I was sad and utterly exhausted. "I'm not sure," I told him. "That makes perfect sense," he said. We sat quietly, and I tried to sort through the chaos in my head. Anger, so rational, at a father calling after 4 years, only to beg for money. But then guilt, a nagging voice whispering, maybe I should help. He's family. Denying him makes me just as wicked as them. And then the pain, the crushing realization that they only ever contacted me when they needed something. I found my therapist's number. It was after hours, so Dr. Claire Morgan's voicemail came on, and my hand shook as I left a message, asking for an emergency appointment. I heard my mother's voice. "Don't be selfish. Family helps family. Good girls don't leave their brothers in surgery." I hated that voice, hated how it still controlled me. I hung up and told Lucas I'd called my therapist. He squeezed my hand. "Great idea," he said. That night, Lucas slept beside me, but I stared at the ceiling. My brain, instead of shutting down, replayed every toxic memory. At 7, my father lost another job. My mother said I worried and distracted him. The 3-year-old car accident. Didn't see the other car she'd claimed for years because I was focused on you in the back seat. My grandmother's death when I was 5. My parents stared at me, talking about bad luck, as if I had caused her cancer. I realized I was silently crying. Each memory, a tiny, unhealed wound. Dr. Claire Morgan's office called the next morning with a 1:30 p.m. cancellation. I never called in sick, but that morning I couldn't focus. I walked around my apartment, cleaning an already clean kitchen, organizing my bookshelf by color, then author, then color again. I started 4 streaming shows, but couldn't concentrate on any. I arrived at her office 20 minutes early, practicing my exit speech in the car, feeling like I'd time-traveled back to my worried 24-year-old self. Dr. Claire Morgan pointed to a familiar chair, and I sat instantly crying. I poured out the entire story, the call, my father's voice, the money demand, everything. I talked for 18 minutes, and she just listened, nodding occasionally. When I finally finished, she paused, then asked, "What do you want to do?" Not what I should do, or what would make things better, but what I wanted. I'd researched Ethan's illness the night before, spent 90 minutes reading about his surgery. It was genuine, vital. Without it, he'd face major issues. But I also knew my parents let him live rent-free, playing video games in his childhood room, paying for everything. They never made him get an insurance job. They never forced him to be independent like they did me at 19. I'd bought my own clothes and school supplies at 17, and he was 32, and they still washed his laundry. Dr. Claire Morgan asked why Ethan had no insurance, and it clicked. He'd never worked long enough for benefits. He'd worked maybe 7 months in the last 6 years, always quitting or getting fired, always returning home. They kept him dependent, yet blamed me for being a burden as a child. My chest ached from the double standard. I paid for my own expenses as a child, and he in his 30s got full assistance, yet I still got the money request call. We spent the next 35 minutes discussing the difference between helping a family in crisis and reinforcing the broken patterns that drove me out. Dr. Claire Morgan warned that giving them money without conditions would only reinforce their belief that I existed to fix their problems, and that I was responsible for all their woes. After years of accusing me of causing their problems, she wondered what message I'd send by paying $18,500. I hadn't thought of it that way, but she was right. It would mean agreeing with them, admitting I owed them anything for raising their miserable daughter. After therapy, I wrote down my limits, what I would do before responding to my father. Defining parameters instead of a simple yes or no felt strange, unsettling, yet possibly powerful. Dr. Claire Morgan reminded me that I could choose my relationship with them. I didn't have to accept their narrative. As I drove home, I thought about proper assistance, something that didn't make me feel betrayed, but also didn't abandon Ethan when he was sick. Lucas came home around 7:15. My laptop was open, a notebook full of scrolled thoughts on the kitchen table. Before asking what I wanted for dinner, he put down his bag, kissed my head. I said I didn't care, so he suggested Thai. As we waited, he sat across from me and asked how I was. I closed my laptop. I've been running around in circles all day, trying to figure out what to do, I admitted. He grabbed my hand. There might not be a right answer, he said, but you can set boundaries for what you can offer. We ate at the table, not in front of the TV. Between bites of pad thai, I told him I couldn't stop thinking about Ethan's surgery. How awful it felt to ignore it. Lucas agreed. Helping doesn't make you responsible for fixing your parents' mistakes, he said. Instead of giving money to parents who hadn't managed finances in decades, he suggested helping Ethan find resources. The idea clicked. I could research hospital payment plans, financial aid, maybe even help Ethan apply for medical assistance if he qualified. That felt different from sending my father a check and expecting it to fix anything. This way, Lucas suggested, I could help Ethan get treatment while my parents avoided responsibility for their own poor choices. We talked logistics, and I felt less trapped between two terrible options. Saturday morning, I vowed to answer that email before losing my nerve. Lucas went to the gym, and I made coffee, sitting at my laptop with a clear mind for the first time since my father's call. I started a new message, entered his email, and stared at the blank space. My first draft was furious. I deleted it. The second sounded too apologetic. The third felt closer. I understand Ethan's need for surgery and want to help him get it. I explained my discomfort with giving them money directly, but offered to help Ethan research financial aid and payment plans. I edited it for 90 minutes, stripping away defensiveness, justification. By lunchtime, it was clear and solid, but not nasty. I saved it as a draft, deciding to reread it tomorrow with fresh eyes. On Sunday, I read it twice, made minor tweaks. Lucas read it over my shoulder. It's rational, sympathetic, and respectful of your boundaries, he said. I hesitated before clicking send. A part of me knew this would infuriate them. They wanted money without strings, and I was offering something entirely different. But I also knew that if I gave them what they wanted, I'd hate myself and nothing would ever change. I took a deep breath. Click. Send. Monday afternoon, my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. My stomach sank. That ancient instinct made me answer. Before I could even greet her, she launched in. I can't believe you'd be so ungrateful after all we did for you. Her biting voice, the same one that made me want to hide as a child. She claimed they sacrificed so much for me and my brother, and this was how I repaid them. I tried to say I'd volunteered to help, but she cut me off. She cited my email demanding family loyalty, not donations. I almost laughed at the word loyalty, but my chest ached. I had been loyal to people who criticized my very existence my entire life. I muttered about wanting to help Ethan, but she interrupted again. That's not true, Aid. Writing a check and trusting us would help. I could hear my father ranting in the background, but couldn't make out his words. My mother switched tactics, recounting my childhood failures. My 7th grade math became a big disappointment. Not being cast in a 9th grade play proved I wasn't trying hard enough. Every ordinary childhood experience became proof of my inherent flaws. My comments grew softer, shorter. Sitting at my kitchen table, listening to her explain how a broken dishwasher was connected to my negative energy, I felt 15 again, shrinking. I hated this cycle. Then she said something that made my body stop. She thought I had plenty of money because I don't have kids like Ethan. When she casually condemned a child for being born, for needing stuff, my chest loosened. Both of us were surprised by my laughter. Not a happy laugh. It sounded like something breaking from overbending. That's the problem, I explained, my voice shaking but clear when she asked what was funny. You keep blaming others for your actions and I'm done. Despite her usual interruptions, I wouldn't let her. I spoke over her, telling her I would help Ethan find services and payment options, but I would not give them money to keep denying responsibility. My father's rant about rude kids and ungrateful girls grew louder in the background. My mother's furious, icy voice, which used to scare me senseless, simply said, "Fine, we'll figure it out on our own, as we always do. No thanks to you." She hung up before I could respond, leaving me shivering in my office. I walked to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall for 12 minutes, just breathing. My entire body tingled with adrenaline, rage, and a fierce pride. I had defied her. I had spoken truths I'd thought about for years, but was too afraid to say. I washed my face with cold water, then went back to work, though I couldn't focus all afternoon. Lucas found me staring at nothing on the couch that night. He sat beside me, and I started crying the angry, irritated tears I'd held back since the call. He embraced me, and I sobbed into his chest. I told him about the call, how my mother had treated every childhood failure like a trial. When I could speak, I told him about her depleting resources comment, how it broke my heart to hear her blame Ethan for his existence, just like she blamed me. Lucas ran his hand through my hair. "Setting boundaries doesn't make you a bad person," he said. He reminded me that they requested help, but declined when I offered conditions. They wanted me to fix their issue without changing their operations. He was right, but it hurt. I had hoped, deep down, they might surprise me, might understand. Instead, they were exactly as I expected. The next day, I wrote Ethan an email. I found his old address from years ago and stared at the blank message for 25 minutes. I deleted 4 versions before settling on a concise solution. I offered to investigate hospital payment arrangements and financial aid programs for him, suggesting a few online resources and offering to help him apply. I didn't mention our parents, the call, or any family drama. I focused on the issue, not the emotions. My finger hovered over the submit button for 7 minutes before I pressed it. The email disappeared. I wondered if the address was even valid. Over the next 4 days, I checked my email constantly. Every notification, even spam, made me queasy. My phone was always with me. Lucas noticed me looking at it during dinner and asked if I was expecting something big. When I told him about the email, he silently squeezed my hand. On the 4th day, an answer. Ethan thanked me for the offer but said, "Our parents already found another solution." He didn't say what solution or where the money came from. I read the letter 6 times, searching for subtext, but it was plain brief. I felt relieved I didn't have to engage further, but also guilty, thinking maybe I should have just given them the money. I hated that I was still doubting myself, still questioning people who had never treated me well. My therapy session was 3 days away, so I called Dr. Claire Morgan then and there. She listened as I recounted everything, including my mother's litany of childhood mistakes. Dr. Claire Morgan asked me to note my responses during the call. I quieted down as my mother spoke. I returned to accepting her words, shrinking. Like 11-year-old me, I apologized for undeserved mistakes. But your conclusion speech broke the pattern, Dr. Claire Morgan said. The fact that you regressed initially doesn't erase the fact that you found your voice and set a boundary. I told her that wasn't enough. I'd let her talk like that for most of the conversation. Dr. Claire Morgan advised me not to expect immediate success in changing habits ingrained for years. I confessed. I learned my mother will never see me differently, no matter what I accomplish. Dr. Claire Morgan nodded. That's actually important information, she said, because now you can stop trying to prove yourself to someone who refuses to see the proof. I checked my phone all week, even after Ethan responded. I waited for my parents to call with more demands, more wrath. But nothing happened. The stillness confirmed my suspicions, making it almost as bad as another fight. They only wanted my money, not a relationship. If they cared, they would have followed up, or at least claimed to care. Instead, they were told no and disappeared. How do you feel? Dr. Claire Morgan asked at our next appointment. It makes me sad, I told her, but it also frees me from wondering if things will ever change. My worries disappeared into work. I immersed myself in a community center project, working details at my desk for hours. For nights, I stayed late. 3 times I arrived early. Daniel Harris, my boss, stopped by on Friday afternoon. You've been working long hours, he remarked. He asked how I was doing, suggesting I take a day off next week. My work had become a way to avoid thinking about my family. I thanked him, promising to take Monday off, even though I hated being bored. Rachel, a colleague I admired, asked me for lunch that afternoon. We ordered salads. I told her everything. Being the family scapegoat, Ethan's operation, my father's money request, my mother's phone call, how I stood up to her, and yet how awful I still felt. Rachel listened until I finished, then quietly said she hadn't spoken to her father in 7 years. Guilt never goes away, she said, but it improves over time. Her father was controlling and manipulative, and cutting him off was the best thing she ever did for herself. Hearing this professional, successful woman share similar family issues made me feel less alone. Then she said something truly meaningful. Choosing oneself isn't selfish when you could burn yourself to warm others. It was a familiar saying, but hearing it from her made it more real. Her accomplishments, her respect, her control over her own life. She made the same decision I was making. It made me realize I wasn't bad for hiding from my parents. We ate the rest of our lunch, but her words echoed. Maybe self-care wasn't bad daughterhood. Maybe my parents had prevented both. That night, I retrieved a college journal my therapist had encouraged me to keep. Something prompted me to write in it again after years. I sat with a notepad and wrote down my entire blame history from birth to now. I found specific events that perfectly fit into their system where my parents were never at fault. Ethan and I were blamed for every job loss, financial hardship, family crisis. I described how they never took responsibility for their drinking, their financial mismanagement, their refusal to see doctors. Seeing it all on paper, a clear pattern emerged, not just a series of negative events. I wasn't unlucky or cursed. They needed someone to blame to avoid facing themselves. Lucas suggested a weekend getaway. He booked a small coastal cottage. As we drove out of the city on Friday, my shoulders relaxed. The cottage was small, old, but right on the beach. Saturday morning, I walked alone in the sand while Lucas slept. Despite the cold gray ocean and wind, I kept walking. The physical distance from my hometown mirrored the emotional distance I was trying to maintain. 5 hours wasn't enough. Sometimes I needed to be truly alone. On that beach, a new, obvious realization hit me. My parents' story about my bad luck never actually involved me. I was 7 months old when my dad lost his job. My mother's car accident happened when I was 3. They blamed a baby and a toddler, rather than admitting my father was fired for poor performance, or my mother was driving distracted. The story included every bad thing after that because it had to be true. If I was the issue, they didn't need to change. They could keep making bad financial decisions, ignore their health, and blame their daughter for everything. The realization made perfect sense, but it didn't lessen the pain. It was never about me. It was always about them. Returning to my condo, I searched my contacts for Emma's number. We hadn't spoken in months. She answered on the fourth ring, surprised and happy. We chatted about her new job, my promotion, her cat. Then I told her about my parents' money request, Ethan's surgery, and my struggle to figure out what I owed them. Emma listened without interrupting. When I finished, she reminded me of my freshman year apology to our dorm neighbor for loud breathing. She said, "You apologized for existing back then. Now you're setting boundaries with people who made you feel worthless for 19 years. I'm proud of your progress." I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until it hit me. We talked for another 90 minutes about everything and nothing, and it felt good to be with someone who remembered me when I was just learning to be human. Near the end of the call, Emma announced her engagement, a spring wedding in 6 weeks. She invited me to be in the wedding party. I gladly accepted. The request brought me a pure joy, unrelated to any family drama. This was my life now. They chose me and I chose them. I sat on my couch after we hung up, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The next day, cleaning out my closet, I found a cardboard box in the back, behind a jacket I hadn't worn in years. It was old family photos my mother had sent after I moved out. Childhood photos made me uncomfortable, so I'd never looked at them. I laid them out one by one on my bed. At a birthday party, everyone else was happy, but 6-year-old me stared at the camera with sadness. In a school photo, 9-year-old me was slumped, trying to disappear. At a family event at 13, Ethan smiled and I looked down. I saw it in every shot now. Even on happy occasions, my eyes were sad. I had carried their responsibility before I even realized what it was. After going through the box, only 5 photos remained, me alone, or with high school friends who genuinely liked me. I donated the rest. I didn't need concrete memories of a childhood I'd spent years undoing. At my next appointment, Dr. Claire Morgan asked about my family relationship. The question surprised me because I'd been so focused on what I didn't want, I'd forgotten what I did. I sat there for 90 seconds, unsure how to respond. "I don't want no contact forever," I finally said. It feels like letting them win in a different way. But I also reject their reality, the one that blames me for all their problems. Dr. Claire Morgan nodded. "Let's practice future conversations," she suggested, "so you can stay calm without defending your position." We role-played for the rest of the session. Dr. Claire Morgan played my mother, accusing me of abandoning the family. I practiced answering quietly, without explaining, without fighting. I underestimated its difficulty. Every time she accused me in my mother's voice, I felt smaller, quieter, like I was 16 again. We discussed the same topic 6 times before I shut down or got angry. Dr. Claire Morgan assured me it was normal. Years of indoctrination don't disappear just because you understand them, she said. That night, I sat with my laptop and wrote a letter I wouldn't send. I poured out everything I wanted to tell my parents about their scapegoating, the harm it caused. I wrote about thinking I was cursed at 11, about buying my own school supplies at 17 to avoid being a burden. I wrote about graduating college with honors and still waiting for their approval, about moving 5 hours away because I couldn't breathe in their home. The letter was 5 pages long. When I finished, a pressure I hadn't known I carried released from my chest. I saved it to a PC folder, then closed the laptop. 6 weeks passed. I'd almost forgotten about my parents. Then, Ethan called unexpectedly. He said his surgery went well, and he was recovering at home. His email was only 4 words, but then he added an awkward paragraph, thanking me for volunteering to help, even though they didn't need it. I read it 6 times, making sure I wasn't misinterpreting his closest thing to an apology. I responded 2 days, later to avoid seeming eager. "Glad you're okay," I wrote, offering to chat pressure-free. I kept it brief, encouraging future communication without pressuring him. We could connect with Ethan without our parents now, without repairing them. His perspective was changing. Maybe that was enough. 2 weeks later, Daniel Harris invited me into his office. I walked there, wondering what I'd done wrong. Instead, he told me I'd be managing a major downtown public library project. I just stared at him, trying to process my biggest project yet. Daniel Harris said I'd earned it, working hard for 6 years, that I could handle it. I trusted him. I didn't wait for the other shoe to drop, or for him to admit his mistake. This project would consume my time for the next few months, in the best possible way. I was using skills I developed over years of pushing myself, proving I wasn't cursed or unfortunate, or whatever my parents called me. I spent most nights drawing, meeting with the design team, presenting to the client. Halfway through one presentation, it hit me. My parents would say, "This success won't last, something will fall apart because that's what happens to you." I ignored them and kept discussing load-bearing walls and natural light optimization. The client loved the design. Daniel Harris walked me back to my desk. "The team wants drinks on Friday to celebrate," he said. I told him I'd be there, feeling proud and astonished to be leading something so big. Lucas emailed me that afternoon, asking how the presentation went. I responded with 3 celebration emojis. I couldn't say it without sounding too happy. He immediately suggested doing something special that weekend. 3 days later, he told me he'd reserved a table at a downtown Italian restaurant for Rachel and some office mates. I spent 25 minutes trying to decide what to wear for a dinner celebrating my success, which felt absurd, but good. I arrived on Friday night to find everyone waiting. Rachel called me over. Lucas pulled out my chair like it was a formal occasion. Daniel Harris had ordered snacks, kept saying how much the client loved my presentation. I sat there listening to colleagues compliment my job, and it hit me, this is normal. Nobody expected me to fail. No one joked about how long my luck would last. These individuals genuinely enjoyed having me around and believed I was competent. Rachel raised her glass. After a year and a half of mentoring her, I knew she'd be running projects, she said. The entire table toasted me. I had to blink back tears. I'd never had anyone honor me like this. My parents had a massive celebration for my brother when he got into college, but warned me not to make a big deal about my scholarship. This supper with coworkers meant more to me than any family gathering ever had. The next week, my phone reminded me of my mother's birthday. I gazed at the notification for 90 seconds before swiping it away. Every year since I left home, I'd called her, even though she barely recognized mine. This year I didn't. I felt bad for about 90 minutes. That old, familiar ache in my gut whispered, "You're a lousy daughter." Then I remembered. My mother hadn't even called on my previous birthday, breaking her annual habit of checking in to see if I'd failed yet. She couldn't even raise her normal, sympathetic voice to inquire about my well-being. The guilt evaporated. I spent the rest of the day working on project planning, not thinking about her until Lucas asked if I'd talked to my family that evening. "No," I said. He just nodded, squeezed my hand, and didn't press. My next session with Dr. Claire Morgan was 3 weeks later than our usual weekly schedule. She'd advised spreading them out because I was doing better, and I agreed, even though a part of me still craved the weekly check-in. We spent the first few minutes catching up on the project supper and my mother's birthday. Dr. Claire Morgan sat back in her chair. "You're not simply surviving anymore," she said unexpectedly. "You're actually doing well, constructing a life based on your values, rather than simply reacting to your family's rejection." I sat with it for a moment. She was correct. The condo, the job, my relationship with Lucas, my friendships with Rachel and my coworkers. None of it happened because I was fleeing my parents. It happened because I chose it. I constructed it on purpose. Dr. Claire Morgan inquired how that felt. "It feels strange," I told her. good, and sometimes terrifying because there's still a voice in my brain that expects everything to come apart. She reminded me that the voice belonged to my mother, not to me, and I could choose whether or not to listen. For weeks later, I received an SMS from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, assuming spam, but something compelled me to read it. The message claimed it was from Ethan. It asked if we could meet for coffee when he visited my city in 2 weeks for a follow-up appointment. My instant emotion was a surge of dread which surprised me. I thought I was done worrying about what my brother thought. I stared at the message for 12 minutes, trying to figure out what he wanted. Half of me wanted to disregard it, but another half wondered why he was reaching out now. I replied, sure. We can meet at a coffee shop near the hospital, somewhere public where I can leave if it gets weird. He answered with a thumbs-up emoji and a time. I spent the next few weeks wondering if I'd made a mistake. Ethan showed up looking better than I'd seen him in years. He'd regained weight, no longer looked gray and weary. We got coffee, found a corner table. The first 12 minutes were so unpleasant, I almost regretted coming. He asked about my employment. I gave brief responses. I asked about his recuperation. He did the same. We were dancing around whatever he really wanted to say. Then he set his cup down, looking at me squarely for the first time. He told me that during his rehabilitation, he'd thought a lot about our family, about how things happened when we were younger. He thought he was starting to see things differently now that he'd been away from the house. I didn't say anything, just waited. He described how our parents panicked when he underwent surgery, saying they couldn't bear the burden of really having to care for someone. He saw them hurry and worry, blaming everyone but themselves for not saving money. It helped him realize things he hadn't wanted to see before. He didn't offer a full apology, and I didn't expect one, but he admitted he'd profited from being the golden kid while I was blamed for everything. He acknowledged he went along with it because it was simpler than confronting them. He claimed that watching our parents struggle financially and fall apart over his medical bills taught him they weren't good at caring for anyone, including themselves. They just wanted someone to blame, and I was available. I respected his honesty more than I expected. I didn't need him to reject our parents or legitimize what I'd gone through. Just hearing him admit the family dynamic was messed up and that he played a role was enough. We ended up talking for nearly 3 hours, far longer than I planned. We talked about college, how he dropped out, the years playing video games because he didn't know what else to do. He asked about my current life, and actually listened when I told him about the architecture firm, Lucas, my condo. Before we left, we agreed to stay in touch, to possibly start something new rather than trying to repair a sibling relationship that had never really existed. Near the end of our conversation, Ethan mentioned he was finally looking for a real job. He had a few interviews scheduled. He claimed our parents were upset, telling him he wasn't ready, that he should save money first. Listening to him, I realized they needed someone to manage, to control. When I left, they still had Ethan. But now that he was getting healthier and more independent, they were losing control. Without me to blame, Ethan became the target in different ways, not the scapegoat, but the project, the person they could watch over and make decisions for. He was starting to see it, and he wanted out. After Ethan left, I sat in my car for a few minutes before heading home. Then I called Dr. Claire Morgan, even though it wasn't our session day. She answered. I told her about the meeting, everything Ethan said. I was surprised by how much lighter I felt. Having Ethan acknowledge even a portion of the family dysfunction made me feel less crazy for distancing myself. Dr. Claire Morgan agreed that sometimes just one person validating your experience can change everything. She asked how I felt about staying in touch with him. Cautiously hopeful, I said. I didn't expect him to become my best friend, but having one family member willing to be open felt worthwhile. That night, Lucas asked if I believed my parents would ever change. We were on the couch, my cat curled between us. He asked cautiously, unsure if I wanted to talk about it. I thought for a full minute. I no longer need them to change, I told him. My peace no longer depends on whether they grow, learn, or remain the same. I have built a life without them, and it is good. If they want to be a part of it someday, they must meet me where I am, rather than expecting me to shrink back into the role they gave me. Lucas nodded, pulled me closer, and we sat in peaceful silence. The cat stretched, digging her claws into my leg, and I didn't mind. I was enjoying this quiet evening at home, with someone I loved and a pet who hadn't run away. This was the life I chose, and it was sufficient. The holidays approached faster than I expected. November arrived with cold mornings and early darkness. Everyone at work started discussing Thanksgiving plans. Lucas asked what I wanted to do, and for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't have to dread making an obligatory call home or feel bad about not showing up. I want to host something at our home, I told him, and invite people who want to be around us. He grinned, immediately compiling a list of friends. We spent 10 days planning the menu and cleaning the condo, and I found myself excited, not anxious. Rachel brought wine and homemade rolls. 3 of Lucas's coworkers showed up with dessert. My cat hid under the bed for the first 90 minutes, then slowly crept out to investigate all the new people. We crowded around my small dining table, which barely accommodated everyone, passing dishes family style. It felt warm and genuine, in a way holidays at my parents' house never did. Halfway through dinner, Rachel refilled her wine glass. "How are you doing with everything?" she asked, gesturing around the table as if she meant more than the food. I took a quiet minute. She deserved honesty. "I'm sad about what could have been," I admitted. "The family I should have had but didn't. But I'm not willing to give up my well-being for people who refuse to see me clearly." She raised her glass. "That's the healthiest thing I've heard all year," she said. Everyone else raised their glasses too. We toasted to our chosen family, to new traditions. Something settled in my chest that had been unsettled for years. My phone buzzed during dessert. I almost ignored it, but something prompted me to check. It was a text from Ethan. Just a few words, letting me know he was thinking of me, hoping I was having a good day. Nothing elaborate or emotional, just short and genuine. I stared at the message for a long moment, then saved it to a folder I'd started keeping of the few good family moments I had. It wasn't much, but it was real, and that mattered more than I expected. I texted back a simple, "Thanks, same to you," then put my phone away and rejoined the conversation. Lucas caught my eye across the table, and I smiled at him, feeling hopeful about having at least one family connection that wasn't built on blame and dysfunction. Work picked up the week after Thanksgiving as we pushed toward the project launch deadline. I spent long hours at the office, finalizing details, coordinating with contractors. And somehow it all came together better than I imagined. The community center opened in early December, and the local architecture magazine sent someone to photograph it and interview me about the design process. When the article came out 12 days later, Daniel Harris framed it and hung it in my office without asking. He just walked in one morning with a framed magazine page and a drill and put it on the wall across from my desk. I stared at it for a solid 90 seconds, reading my own name in print next to photos of something I created. Daniel Harris told me to let myself feel proud without qualifying it with worry about what might go wrong next. I nodded and actually tried to do that, sitting with the accomplishment instead of immediately looking for ways it might fall apart. My next session with Dr. Claire Morgan happened a few days before Christmas. We'd been meeting every 3 weeks since the whole Ethan surgery situation, but she opened the session by asking if I thought I was ready to reduce to monthly check-ins. The question caught me off guard. I thought about the past couple of months and realized the family crisis hadn't destroyed the stability I'd built. I handled it without falling apart or reverting to old patterns for more than brief moments. "Yes," I told her, "I think I'm ready." And she smiled like she already knew my answer. We spent the rest of the session talking about what monthly check-ins would look like and what warning signs to watch for that might mean I needed more frequent support again. Walking out of her office, I felt a different kind of pride than from the magazine article. This pride was quieter, deeper. It was about emotional work nobody saw, but that mattered just as much. Lucas and I were washing dishes one night when he brought up the future in a way that felt different from our usual vague planning. He asked if I'd thought about getting engaged. My immediate reaction was to check myself for panic about cursing our relationship, but the panic didn't come. I dried a plate. Honestly, I told him, I have thought about it, and I don't feel scared anymore. I've learned my presence in people's lives isn't a burden, but a gift. He stopped washing and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite name. Then we should talk seriously about it, he said. We spent the next 90 minutes on the couch, mapping out what we wanted our lives to look like. It was easy and exciting, instead of heavy with dread about inevitable failure. I wrote the letter to my parents on a Saturday morning while Lucas was at the gym. I'd written versions of this letter before, but never sent them, always talking myself out of it, or deciding silence was safer. This time I kept it brief and clear. I explained I was open to contact if they could respect me as an adult with my own life, but I wouldn't accept blame or manipulation anymore. I outlined specific boundaries about what kind of relationship I was willing to have, and what behaviors I wouldn't tolerate. I read it 4 times, checking for anything that sounded like I was asking for their approval, or trying to convince them I was worthy. Then I addressed an envelope and walked to the mailbox before I could change my mind. The letter dropped through the slot with a soft thud. I stood there for a moment, feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. For weeks passed with no response. I checked the mail every day, even though I told myself I wouldn't. Lucas asked if I was okay, and I realized I actually was. Their silence was an answer in itself. Some people aren't capable of the relationship I deserve, and that's about them, not me. I stopped checking the mail obsessively and focused on the life I was building instead of the one I'd never have with them. Ethan called in mid-January. I answered on the 4th ring. He sounded different, more energetic than I'd heard him in years. He told me he got a job offer at a tech support company, and he was moving into his own apartment in 6 weeks. His voice shook a little when he talked about it, nervous but excited, and I encouraged him, genuinely. I told him I was happy he was building his own independence, and I meant it. We talked for 25 minutes about his apartment search and his new job, and it was the most normal sibling conversation we'd ever had. Before we hung up, he thanked me again for meeting with him back in November, saying it helped him see things more clearly. I told him he did the hard work himself. I just listened. After the call, I sat in my home office, looking at the framed magazine article on my wall. My cat jumped into my lap and started purring, and I petted her absently, thinking about how far I'd come. I realized somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking of myself as the family scapegoat and started seeing myself as someone who survived a difficult childhood and built something beautiful. This shift in identity felt huge, like stepping into a version of myself I always wanted to be, but didn't think I deserved. I wasn't the cursed daughter, or the bad luck charm, or the burden they tried to make me believe I was. I was just someone who refused to accept their story about who I had to be, and wrote a better one instead. I was sitting on the couch Tuesday night, my feet tucked under me, watching Lucas rinse dinner plates at the sink. He turned around, wiped his hands on a dish towel, then walked over and sat next to me without saying anything at first. My cat jumped down from the armrest and disappeared into the bedroom. Lucas took my hand. His palm felt warm against mine. He told me he didn't want to wait for some perfect moment, because our regular life together was already perfect. He asked if I'd marry him. His voice was steady, but his hand trembled slightly in mine. I said yes before he finished the question, tears already sliding down my cheeks. He pulled a simple silver ring from his pocket and slid it onto my finger. We sat there, crying and laughing at the same time, and I thought about how this moment wasn't cursed or doomed or temporary. It was just real and good and mine. We spent the next 90 minutes calling people to share the news. Emma answered on the first ring, and I barely got the words out before she screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She was already talking about engagement party colors and venue options before I could tell her we hadn't planned anything yet. Rachel congratulated us, saying she knew it was coming, because she'd never seen two people fit together so naturally. Each call felt easy and happy, without any weight of family drama, or waiting for someone to tell me it wouldn't last. I texted Ethan, calling felt too formal for where we were in rebuilding our relationship. He responded within a few minutes, saying he was happy for me, and asking if he could meet Lucas sometime. I typed back, yes, immediately, and meant it completely. Having one family member who's genuinely trying to show up differently feels like more than I ever expected to have. Over the next couple of months, planning the wedding became something I actually enjoyed, instead of a source of stress about who to invite or who might ruin things. Lucas and I looked at venues with Emma and laughed at her increasingly elaborate ideas. We picked a small garden space that felt intimate and warm. I made a guest list of people who actually wanted to celebrate with us, not people I was obligated to include. Ethan texted occasionally, asking about details and offering to help with setup. I added him to the list without hesitation. The whole process felt light and joyful because I was surrounded by people who chose me and I chose them back. I realized one night while addressing invitations that this was the family I needed all along. Not the one I was born into that treated me like a burden, but the one I built myself from friends and partners, and the one brother who decided to do better. That's not bad luck or a curse finally breaking. That's just the best thing I ever did.